Hey, hello everybody, and welcome to the podcast again. I'm Natalie, your hostess. Really great to see you all again and to be here with you. And today we have with us, I'm very excited to introduce Steve, the founder of Big Calm Tiny Homesteads, or do you just call it Big Calm Homestead, Steve?
Big Calm Tiny Homesteads.
Okay, hi. Welcome so much. And well, I'll tell you how I learned about Steve. So Steve Steve and his partner have a beautiful property out towards New Denver, I believe, Steve,
Around Slocan.
around the
The,
Slocan Valley in the out towards the Kootenays, where I used to live at one point. This was where I began my journey of hybrid living. At that point, I was actually living in a canvas army tent on my friend's property and near a stream, and it was very magical and lovely. And we had a little homestead there with a farm, and that's where I began my journey. So I feel a connection with this project just because I know the area really well. And Steve's project at Big Calm was recommended to me by someone in the tiny home industry. I can't quite remember who, but that's how I come across all the people I interview. It's always through recommendations of people in the industry. And also we've worked together in Tiny House Listings Canada a little bit. You have, by the time this video gets published, you'll have a showcase on our website with more information about how to contact you. So that's how I found out about you, and welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, really glad to be here.
My pleasure to have you. So tell us a little bit about, before we get started in talking about the property and the project and your vision, I just want to let people know a little bit about you and your background as a professional, and also the values that drive you and brought you towards your project.
Yeah, well, my background is I've got a kind of a meandering career where I started um, with a joint degree in sociology and business, and then that went to magazine publishing and advertising, creative production for different projects. Um, uh, Early wave of mobile content, video games and images and ringtones and so on, the very early wave, and then toy robotics and consumer electronics, all the way into disaster management software and kind of working in impact businesses around disaster management and working with startups and nonprofits and later with mental health. So the kind of softer side, I suppose, of resilience projects. And then that led myself and my wife Abby to really kind of sink into the permaculture community and learn about that space. And through that, also learn about different types of innovative housing. We were very interested in earthships and rammed earth buildings. And in some of those forums, tiny houses and tiny houses on wheels would come up a lot. So we learned all about that space as well. And then eventually those two worlds converged when we were looking for property to move to. This was about 5 years ago,
Mhm.
and kind of stumbled upon this property in the Slocan Valley, which, like you said, is a really beautiful, inspiring, natural place, kind of off the tourist path a little bit, and fairly quiet. And it is true to the name. It is a big calm when you're here.
Nice. So so just to clarify, is your background on like the software side or consulting? Like what, you have a degree in sociology and business, and then it sort of evolved and there's different iterations. So, but yeah, in tech, what were you doing specifically?
I was usually the business side
Okay.
of technical teams, so I was working close, kind of as the liaison between the creative and business sides and the technical folks. Um, Often as a producer or creative producer in those types of projects, and that served me well, kind of as a startup founder as well. You wear multiple different hats and you work with a lot of different skill sets, and so I was yeah, kind of a translator or intermediary between the different teams, a facilitator for those projects. And even now, I do a lot of consulting and grant writing for other startup projects, purposeful projects for nonprofits and startups and scale-ups, where I can help, um, I suppose, knit together different aspects of the project that might be gaps for them and help them find non-dilutive funding. So um, I've really, early on in my career, I embraced the kind of generalist mantra to to be that sort of spanner or matchmaker of different interests and disciplines and perspectives, and yeah, and have kind of been industry agnostic, I guess, in my career in doing those things. But I like to I like to be in that team ensemble
Mhm.
of different yeah, perspectives and skill sets.
Cool. Sounds like you're like a sort of a big picture thinker as well. Yeah, maybe integrating different ideas and people. One moment, I'm going to close the door because the dog just came in. Give me a second. So those skills that you mentioned as well probably, well, obviously would really transfer over to working with communities or building out a space that, facilitates community, I'm imagining. So that's awesome. And where are you from in Canada?
I grew up in central Alberta and then went to school in Calgary. I had traveled a couple of times to Montreal and fell in love with the city and promised myself I'd live there for one summer of my life. And that it turned into a 13-year summer,
Wow.
mostly in Montreal, a little bit in New York, and loved it. Yeah, just loved Montreal, everything about it. It's a wonderful city to experience things in, and my first job there was in the kind of in the arts, on the business side of the arts scene with a startup magazine called Maisonneuve, which was a wonderful introduction to that city because we got to go to different vernissages and events and meet different writers and musicians um, and just kind of really soak in the vibrancy of that city.
Yeah.
Um,
And this is another connection that Steve and I have as well. As you can see, I am in an art studio. This is where I do my work for the tiny house project. I also teach art classes from here. So Steve and I both love art. So that's interesting too. And so Steve, what made you leave the city? Like at what point, or what was the catalyst for you to say, okay, I've had enough of living in the city. I want something different. I want to live out in the country or in a rural.
there were a few things. One was I moved back west from Montreal, but was really looking for the same sort of vibe. And I found that on one kind of road trip out to Nelson, much smaller town, but it had the same sort of culture and diversity and energy that I was looking for. So I really liked Nelson, BC. Um, Around the time soon after Abby and I met, I took part. I was lucky to be one of 27 Canadians in a social innovation residency at Banff Center, and that was it was called Getting to Maybe. It's 4 weeks, and it was a lot of systems thinking work and um, indigenous ways of knowing and thinking, and somatics and breath work and dream work and resilience study and theory, kind of self and system and self, with a lot of focus on being on the land and learning from the land and having conversations with nature. And I'd had experience with that. My grandmother, when I was a kid, I'd go out to her farm often, so I saw that often, and I think that might have I maybe had a bit of a yearning to get back to nature, especially after that residency. It was um, just a realization that I had maybe too much screen time, too much city time, and wanted to recalibrate those. And Abby had the same feelings, I think, as well. She had signed up soon after that into a permaculture design course by Verge. Verge Permaculture and really, really enjoyed the learnings that she got in that PDC. And so the two of us were really, I think, in the background, we were like, there's more to what we want to do in life than just what we've got here in the condo in the city. Um, and so we started touring around different areas, mostly in Alberta and BC, to see where we might go to, and we kept gravitating around Nelson. Um, and then soon after that, of course, the pandemic hit, and our kind of dark and noisy uh, condo just that was the last straw. It was like we've got to make the move out, and at that point we'd already put an option to purchase on this property here. So yeah, a few things kind of sequentially that led up to the kind of the catalyst to us moving out to the countryside here.
Yeah. And interesting that you were in Montreal for so long because it's such a cool city, and yet still not quite enough. Hey, it's so rich and has so much to offer, but you still.
I'm so glad I did that. Yeah, I really took full advantage of Montreal and New York and city life. I'm not against city life at all. It's wonderful and it was a great part of that time of my life. But um, yeah, later in life, I was looking for other things, and that reconnection with nature was certainly one of them.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so before you tell us about a bit more about the property and the project, can you just explain for people who don't know, can you tell us what permaculture is?
Yeah, permaculture is it's a it's kind of an engineering with nature. It's not trying to engineer over top of her, but to work with her and to um, kind of figure out how us as humans can work best alongside the natural patterns and rhythms of nature. So some of that's engineering. It's often maybe perceived as kind of a gardening thing because it does have a lot around growing food and different biology and plants and so on. But it is also observing the land for where the wind blows, where the water flows, uh, what zones it makes sense to put certain types of activities like a garden or livestock or rainwater harvesting and to try to efficiently minimize the amount of work that is kind of necessary within a homestead, for example. Um, so they're really useful principles, I guess, around natural systems.
Okay, and if permaculture is it's the way that I understand it, it's designing systems in the way that they would be designed by nature herself. Is that accurate? So you're sort of working using technologies, I'll say, even though it's really not technology in the way we might think of it, the way that nature would do so. So could you give me like a concrete example of that?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm glad I actually used technology because uh, I was telling a story to some friends the other day of my life in Montreal included some improv classes, and in one of the conferences I went to, which was around applied improvisation, there was a this wonderful quote about how improv is the technology of the 21st century. And just to use the term technology around something old-fashioned or non-digital, I suppose, around uh, um, as a technology that's useful in society. It really kind of reminds you that there's a lot of technologies that are simple. They're
Mhm.
basic or mechanical, or they're around interacting with nature and to look more broadly at technologies as innovations that serve a specific purpose. Um, so a good example would be stacking functions is one of the principles of permaculture, and so to take advantage of multiple things that have kind of a reinforcing loop. So, for example, if you have chickens, they can be helpful not only in providing eggs or meat, but they can also be part of the pest control piece. They can also help reduce, bring down some of the grasses in other areas. So different animals can have different interactions with the land as well. And so where would you put, say, a rainwater harvesting collection that also could feed those chickens? And so to look at the different systems that you could put in place that would take advantage of other parts. That the chickens provide also fertilizer. That fertilizer can be used in the garden. So that's one of the main principles, I guess, around permaculture is to stack functions.
Okay, got it. Let me just change this. And when I think of, I'm really interested in permaculture, and I would like to take some permaculture courses as well. I'm interested in the building homes side of it. Does permaculture apply to building homes, or is it mostly growing and the ecosystem systems?
No, permaculture could work with homes too, because well, often homes I think are designed or just placed without any real observation or respect for where they will be placed. And so you see this kind of in architecture conversations where somebody's designed something that's really flashy um, and bold and perhaps quite innovative in an architectural design sense, but it's placed in a neighborhood or a context next to other houses where it just doesn't fit. It doesn't really serve the area, or perhaps even worse, it might provide reflections or drainage um, or other problems that don't fit with the context in which it's placed. So um, yeah, the sorry, Natalie, I lost my train of thought on that
No,
one,
that's
but
okay. I was just wondering about if permaculture homes just
oh yes, yeah.
concepts just apply, yeah, to homes or.
Yeah, so part of the home design is to figure out where it's going to be placed so that you can for example, take advantage of the morning light, to get the sunrise and the lights. If you've got solar panels, it becomes a functional imperative that you've got some sort of alignment with um, the arc of the sun. Um, and perhaps even, there's one permaculturist out there. One of his favorite small stories is that in his tiny house, he puts the HRV, kind of the ventilation system for the house, which is really important in tiny houses, puts it close to his dish rack, which is over his sink. And so that
Hmm,
helps. It's stacking functions in a really clever way, in that the HRV helps to dehumidify the house, but it also helps to dry his dishes.
right.
And in a tiny house, the placement of those types of systems is super important because you don't have a lot of space to waste, and you want to take advantage of those kind of peripheral effects of these things.
All right, awesome. Great. And just one more question about that because I am really interested. So earth in homes and cob building, do those fall under permaculture? Like how do they relate to permaculture? Those two specifically, those two types of homes.
Yeah, it would be to perhaps build out of the materials that the land provides, or in the
Okay.
topography of the land. So if you're building an earthen house or an earthship, you'd be looking for some sort of uh, hill or rockside, mountainside, I guess, that um, you could build into to take advantage of the thermal mass there. And then if you're building with rammed earth, you would want to make sure that the sediment that's there could work, structurally when compressed for rammed earth. But perhaps you don't have that type of dirt available in a particular region, and so something else, maybe like a cob, uh, a straw bale or a cob house might be better, or an A-frame. You might get a lot of snow in an area, and so an A-frame type of roof might be better than a flat roofed building or an earthen building. So it really depends on understanding the landscape and where um, your dwelling would fit best with the materials that might be just naturally available around it. And
Mhm.
then the engineering part is to, of course, don't not to put it in a place, for example, where the water flows, but also not too far away because you'll need to draw on the water. So you're trying to figure out the right placement within the context of other systems or other zones within the homestead is very important.
Okay, okay, great. Thank you so much for explaining that. I have so many questions, but I really just need to take a course, so I'll stop there. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit, or let's talk about the project. So you said that you started scoping around British Columbia sort of before the pandemic, correct?
Yeah, for let's see, the 2018, 2019, we did some road trips, in kind of the foothills of Alberta and different areas of southern BC. So looked at the Okanagan, north and south, looked in and around Nelson and Creston, um, uh, yeah, Crawford Bay, just a whole range of areas. Basically looked at the real estate listings and did a lot of visits along the way to see what properties are available, what's the landscape like, but also what the communities are like. And we just kind of kept coming back to the Nelson area in Slocan Valley is just north of that. And there was this one property that was listed in 2019. Um, and it's so we're on about 37 acres. It's on a nice bench a ways away from the highway. It's got really nice light exposure and two water sources. And when we came and toured it around, it was a pretty spectacular day, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful spot. The drawback was is that the previous owner was living in the original homesteader cabin that was built by a couple American draft dodgers, I think, around 1969. We actually met one of those original homesteaders a few years ago. A neighbor had introduced us, and she and her daughter and granddaughter came and toured the property and told us all about sort of her and her husband's journey up to Canada and what they did with this. At the time, it was a whole quarter section, completely wooded, no power poles, no spring,
Wow.
no septic. So they had really kind of carved out a life here and built a family, kind of right really in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness. And but anyway, that this old homesteader cabin, it's still pretty elegant, but it's not. It was built on bare earth, so the backside is just not in a great shape. Um, and so but we liked the property and we were trying to see about purchasing it, but nobody would insure it. So to carry the financing, we needed some insurance, and just couldn't find any insurer that would do it at any price, really. So we let it go and kept looking, and this was fall at that point, and then in my mind, I kept thinking of how spectacular this property was, um, how versatile it was, just in terms of the topography and then, like I said, the water sources, the sun exposure, everything. And and so I started looking at just started brainstorming around, well, maybe we could get commercial insurance. Maybe there might be some lines of insurance that could cover it if there was a business hooked onto it. And that led us down the path of, we're in an unzoned area. We've got this wonderful meadow here that would be a perfect pocket neighborhood. Apparently, there's a lot of interest for tiny house pads that, because of zoning, restrictive zoning in a lot of areas, just doesn't allow it. We might have a business opportunity here with a tiny house community, which would also be great for us because we would be looking for that kind of community as well. And so I put in an option to purchase. So this isn't a really common thing, but it's something that you can, it's basically a right of first refusal. So if you know that there's this, in our case, that there's this property on the market, likely wouldn't move over the winter, you can pay a small fee to basically get a right of first refusal. And over the course of that, I think it was about an 8 or 9 month contract directly with the owner. We we set up our website for Big Calm, and kind of put out our vision for this and started chatting on some of the message boards and just saying like, are we crazy? Would people want to live with us out here in nature and live in a tiny house in a community? And even before the pandemic kicked in, we had a very positive response. There was clearly some pent-up demand. The only spots really available were somebody's, alleyway, driveway, or a crowded campground. And so the vision that we had, where you'd have more space, and also these kind of permaculture projects around, raised bed gardens and other things that really resonated with people. And when the pandemic happened, then of course everybody was really interested in uh, leaving cities and perhaps rebalancing their work life balance, and and also that they were able now to work from anywhere. So the remote work thing also helped. So those kind of forces all kind of converged. We were sitting on this beautiful piece of property at pre-pandemic prices, and Abby and I both had this kind of urge to get back to nature, to be in the countryside, and we're like, well, we've got to do this now. We've got an interest. We can start to build this community, and we've got this property and a good price at it. So we, in mid 2020, we closed the deal and then moved out here and started. Uh, it wasn't an easy settlement, but we moved out here and then started to fix things up and get it habitable.
And congratulations that all worked out for you. When you so hang on, let me just deal with the dog door again. She's funny. She senses when there's dogs outside and she just goes out there, which is good, I guess. Okay, so when you moved to the property, what did you live in? Because you said it was treed, right? It needed to be cleared and everything, parts of it.
No, it had at this point it had already been like the main meadow space had been cleared a decade or more before. And and so in any of the Big Calm kind of glamour shots that we've got, that open field that we call it the meadow is really the main space. It's about 3 or 4 acres. Um, that was already cleared and kind of open, and it just fit really nicely with the whole idea of pocket neighborhoods, kind of around Ross Chapin's idea there of houses that face each other and have space enough between them, but also that there's this clear cohesion amongst them as well.
Right.
But when we moved out, we were expecting, we lined up contractors, already done the engineering around wastewater and water and so on. We were expecting the project to take about 3 months, and so from September to November, December, we would basically get the barn loft, the Shangri loft where I am now, get that fixed up, pull out the services, and be on the land, and go through one winter and then get to things like the garden and other systems in the spring. Unfortunately, it was one thing after another. It was kind of flaky contractors, so busy with kind of the COVID surge. And then it was crews, drywallers, insulators, carpenters at different points. People would be out sick, which would delay things. Supply chain for everything was
Yeah,
ridiculous.
really hard at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, parts were just not available, and then also there was a wildfire that popped up right when the machines were
Wow.
mobilized. A wildfire just over the ridge here, a really large one. That's actually how we met the original homesteaders. Was she'd reached out to a neighbor, saying, that place is probably going to burn down. I'd like to see it one last time.
Wow.
And it didn't. We've got a nice fire break on the other side of the ridge here. But that was a very tense moment that we just purchased something that could really just go up in
Wow.
flames. We were living not here on the property though. We were about 30 minutes north, in just around Silverton, in a European guest rental that was closed because of the lockdown. And so we were commuting every week or so to do things or meet with contractors, but we weren't actually able to be on the land. Um, and then finally, near the end of it too, the end of kind of the first year, we thought we'd finally get to be in before winter, but couldn't find, like, there just was no insulation anywhere in North America for the for this tiny
Really?
little for this tiny little barn lofts. Yeah, we needed
Wow.
yeah, spray foam insulation, and it just was not available anywhere. So we overwintered again, and yeah, that was about 16, 17 months of not being here on the property. But the silver lining is that coming, we were able to kind of acclimate to the Kootenays generally in the winters and so on, but we were also able to take a step back from our ambitious plans and observe the lands. And that was actually a really good thing for us to do, was to go through a few seasons of, see where the water flows. Like one
Mhm.
of our main drawings has a pond up in the meadow, but we're like, no, actually the water wants to collect here. This is where a pond should go. Um, so it was actually a good learning experience in that sense. It was very frustrating, but it did help us to it did force us into some patience in other regards.
And you said there's two sources of water just touching on that. So what are they?
We've got a creek and a spring, and
Wow.
yeah, we're just on the mountainside off Crown land. So yeah, it's amazing water. It's just incredibly refreshing, clean.
Clean. Live water
Um,
too, I'm guessing, right? Live water because it's coming from
yeah,
nature. Yeah.
yeah,
Amazing.
um, yeah, and we will probably put in a well as well, just to have some extra redundancies there.
Okay, so after things started rolling and you started getting momentum, what is the order of things that a person would go through? Just kind of generally walk us through, like, what do you start with, and then what, and then what, and then what?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. You start kind of with the core principles. In terms of a community or a future community, one of the main things for us was the water and wastewater systems.
Mhm.
So uh, and we looked at this with different engineers even before we purchased the property, is to make sure that the water was that the sources were good, and that we could work with that water and move it into different filtration or pumping systems. Um, and the wastewater is probably the main piece. Really, we call it the beast of the project. It's the least glamorously sexy part of the project because it's basically septic system and it's all underground. But it's the most expensive and probably the most important part of the property was the placement of that. We invested in a type 2 community septic system. So it's a very large system, and type 2 is a very clean effluent. So it's a smaller footprint and it's a much cleaner effluent that goes back to the ground. We can geek out on that system, but nobody's really that interested in it. But it is super important, and I do feel like there are other projects probably that shortcut or shortchange that part of the process. But for us, that was super important to dot our I's and cross our T's in terms of water and wastewater, especially considering we were unzoned. So we didn't have any bylaws or other regulations um, to kind of navigate around, which can be an issue for others in different jurisdictions. But for us, it was the water, wastewater. So that was
Sorry,
one of the
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that was one of the first things. The other was access. And so our driveway is about 1 kilometer long, and it does have an uphill, curved and
Wow.
uphill section. So, and it was in pretty rough shape. It had grown in and become quite rutted. And because it was on a slope, heavy rains could also wash out or really kind of dig into those ruts. So, um, we wanted to improve that access, of course, just for ourselves on a day-to-day basis, but also we knew that tiny houses would be towing up here, so it needed to, grade needed to be manageable, the corners needed to be wide, um, and uh, and also emergency access and all of that stuff. So that was one of the main things we needed to do early on. We actually coupled that with some selective logging. And so the property is quite wooded in parts, and just over time there were some danger trees and dead growth, dead wood that was around. We didn't want to just come in and cut, and we weren't looking to do any sort of like revenue harvesting or anything, but we knew that we wanted to clear out some trails, get rid of some of those danger trees, and open up light to different younger growth. That forests naturally need to have some sort of cycle and removal of the older trees to let the newer stuff grow and to not accumulate too much of the debris and the combustible fuels that are a problem when it comes to wildfires. So we actually coupled the driveway work with the selective logging. We waited a while to get this. We worked with a company called Acre Shaker. He's amazing. He knows trees so well. I learned so much about forestry and forest health and the logging industry from him. He had special equipment, Scandinavian equipment that was pretty light on the earth and was able to very selectively find the trees that needed to go in the areas that would thrive afterwards. And I'm happy to say 3 years later that it's very obvious that parts of the forest here are much like the young growth is really apparent in his work there. And we don't have any sort of big cut blocks or anything like that. So it's almost like it never happened, but we were able
Wow.
to basically take anything that was merchantable from there and pay for the work in the driveway. So
Wow.
those two balance off, and the benefit of doing that too is that you save on the taxes for any logging. So those were a couple of early things. Abby had worked a lot on the zones around the house here, around the property, where the pathways to the garden, where we should put the greenhouse, where certain tanks could be. Um, uh, we also, around the time, it's kind of funny the timing of this, but we were approached by a gentleman who he's a tiny house enthusiast and had this new build, this 24-foot tiny house on wheels, and he was looking for some sort of special place to put it as a guest stay. And so we figured out a really nice little, we call it the pocket getaway, and it's just really nicely nestled into the forest and close to the driveway, and it had its own power systems and everything. And it was actually here before we were. And um,
Wow.
uh, yeah, and for a little while we were doing, as guests would come here, we would be doing the turnovers remotely. So um, yeah, so all of those things sort of both business and just the kind of functional aspects were things that we looked at early on.
Oh, well, shout out to Acre Shaker. Is that what you called him?
Yep. Yeah, Ian.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, he sounds great. Okay, so it was septic, road, and then zones, correct?
Yeah, zones for placement of things like the greenhouse, that there's sun
Okay.
exposure. Uh, yeah, the different trails and how far things would be if we're moving between them. Um, uh,
What, and then at this point, you already knew that you were gonna have, so zones would be when you would start mapping out and fleshing out the lots for the tiny house pads?
No, I mean zones in the permaculture sense that there would
Okay,
be that you want sort of the activities that you're doing on a daily basis to be really close to where you're living, or in our case, also mindful of where the community would be living. And
okay.
then kind of lesser done activities could be a little further out, and then ones that you don't do often. Kind of in the context of the community, we've clearly got areas of the property that are more hospitality focused. That's where the pocket getaway is, and a nice sort of lawn there. It's close to the pollinator garden and nice views of the garden. Then we've got the garden itself and where we place the greenhouse. There's also, we've got a shop area there where we could store snow blowers and kind of store our recreational equipment and do some workshop stuff. And then we've got other zones that we've looked at as, this might be a really nice place if we did have people in the community that wanted to do something with, sheep or goats or livestock. We've got space there, potentially to do nut trees, for example. And then we've got the meadow itself for the community. And then the zoning within that is what you'd see on our website as far as the different, the pads and the space between the pads. So a lot of that was all carefully considered, all done sort of in concert with all of the variables.
And I believe I read that there's like a little bit of a nature corridor somewhere on the land, or there's a,
Yeah, we've called it kind of our wildlife corridor.
yeah.
It's right off of one of the pads that's available right now for rent. It's close to the entrance to the community, and this is most noticeable in the winter, especially with the elk. So the elk will come in herds. They're large and very majestic, and they really like a plowed driveway. You can tell
Really?
they they're at certain times of the winter, they're quite exhausted from having to trudge through the snow. Same with the deer. And so they often take advantage of our driveway, which is plowed in the winter, and then just veer off and make their own path up the mountain. And so this one pad is, the orientation of the house is such that you probably your kitchen or your living room window just looks right out onto this, and you'd see on a not on irregular basis, you'd see this parade of
Wow.
elk or deer, sometimes bear, or in the spring or right around now, you get the wild turkeys kind of trudging through. So you get to see all the different creatures kind of move through there. Um,
Which pad is that for anyone who's interested in renting? Which one is it?
that's the pad P.
Pad P?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Note that. Anyone? Um, awesome. Okay, so we've got the zones, the road, and the septic. Oh, I know what I was gonna ask you. When you were talking about septic, there was a word that started with an A, and it had to do with the gray water, I believe. What word was that? Did you remember?
Mm,
And no, that's all right.
no, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I was just curious. It feels like it's the wastewater. What's the name for the wastewater itself?
Oh, effluent?
That. Yes, that's what it is.
Yep.
Okay. Um, it sounds like you guys put a lot of care and attention. And so when you say the property wasn't zoned, is it zoned now, or how's that? What is that? What's happening with that?
No, we're in a part of the Kootenays that in the regional district here that isn't zoned. And so by that I mean it's not it doesn't have any zoning restrictions or bylaws that are consequential to placement of tiny houses. Other places would. They might have an official community plan that would dictate if or how many tiny houses could be placed, or what time of year they could be placed there or for how long. So fortunately, we don't have any of that. That was one of the reasons we started looking at, a tiny house community as a potential um, project here, is because it didn't have the same restrictions that most other places had at the time. That's sort of lightening up in different areas, I think, because of the housing supply challenge. We're seeing some jurisdictions ease up on their zoning rules against tiny houses, but it is still pretty restrictive in a lot of areas.
Yeah, and so that opens up the types of tiny homes you can have there as well, right? You can have CSB certified and unsanctioned tiny homes as well,
Yeah,
correct?
we've primarily focused on the certified builds, partly because uh, well, there's the certification aspect as well, and that helps the homeowner to get insurance, which is of course very useful. Um, but the quality of professional builds is really good, and the builders, and most of them are in BC and in Alberta, are excellent. And so partly it's to support the good work that they're building, to help to find places there. But also we'd like to showcase really nice pro-built houses that are going to last and will be durable through the winter, and
Mhm.
um, there are ones that are self-built that are really well done and built with care as well. But there are some pretty scrappy ones, or ones that you can kind of see it around the edges that
Yeah,
that aren't done to the same level of polish or you know safety standards, for example.
right. Okay. Okay, so let's see if there's anything else there I want to ask about the land. Okay, so well, let's talk about the let's talk just briefly about about your vision for Big Calm. What is it that you and Abby want to see happen at Big Calm?
Yeah, so we don't have kids. So we as a couple, we're looking to have basically the idea with the community, as much as it is a business, really, it's to build a community that shares the same sort of interests. Our interests are really around things like wellness and self-reliance and resilience, growing our own food and kind of getting outdoors and working with our hands and working in the dirt and like I said earlier, kind of balancing better the mix between screen time and outdoor time.
Mm-hmm.
You in a city, you're spoiled by the conveniences and how much of the systems are kind of out of sight, out of mind. Somebody else takes care of it. It's just invisible in the background. And while that is convenient, it's also a vulnerability to not know those skills or not know how to fix those. And so part of um, uh, the journey here for us is to either brush up on those skills or just learn entirely new things. For me, it's been like this spring, I built out the irrigation system for the garden. So the drip line system, which is fed off of a ram pump that goes uphill to a water tower. And so all of that plumbing connection and the physics of siphons and ram pumps and so on, um, that was generally new to me, and it was a fun project to take and a lot of nice learning. And you learn those different skills, whether it's carpentry or seed saving or cultivating different produce or tending different animals. All of those are different skills that are quite useful and also a lot of fun. And and so we're looking for folks that are also looking for that kind of recalibration or balance, that have a mix of different skills, including those that we have none of. And we found a lot of really diverse skill sets that are wonderful. Like, to kind of put those together in a community is kind of a special kind of alchemy that we're really going for. Um, yeah, the part of the project too is to not be a campground. It's not a resort. It's not a suburb. It really is kind of homesteads, and to really take advantage of the minimalism and um, the efficiency and the optimization of space that a tiny house has on the inside. And then to balance it with all of the space and some of these amenities and shared goods like a tool library or a washer dryer or trail system, um, so that you have this really vast outdoor experience as well. And so you're not lacking for anything. You've got a nice, comfortable, optimized place to live, but you've got space beyond just your front door to take advantage of as well. And so it doesn't seem as small. You're
Mm-hmm.
not really in a tiny house if you've got a tiny homestead, because, and we say tiny homestead, we're talking acres. So you've got lots of space to move around and do things and walk the dogs and ride the bike and everything. And that's just here on the property. Then you could go elsewhere in the valley to the lake, or go climbing or um, foraging or whatever the interest might be. And so our idea of the community there is to be an intentional community in terms of values, to be kind of agnostic in terms of um, skill sets or philosophies. That a lot of diversity is a benefit here, but also to not be crowded in here and packed in. One of the things in talking to different investors who've toured through here, they love the idea, and they're like, well, you could probably, jam in 30 or 40 units in that space that you've got 8 or 10 marked out for. We're like, well, that's not our idea of a community. It's not a project that we'd like to run. It's not respecting the land, and doesn't fit with the water sources and so on, or the driveway. Um, and I really think that there's an opportunity. We can see it with some other projects in other parts of the province for human scale um, communities, and of around 10 to 12 to 15 units, kind of keeping within that Dunbar number of close friends, um, or friends, not the close friends, but the ring outside of that, which is I believe around 15. And yeah, and not trying to do kind of the real estate development of um, high density.
Right. Cool. And are there vegetable gardens established?
Yeah, that was our project last year. There was a garden space originally, like the previous owner had a garden, and we understand that it was a certified organic garden at one point.
Wow.
When we got it, it was quite grown over and had had a couple seasons untended. So we planted some things in it the first year. Some things worked, some things didn't. And then last year we built out a whole network of raised bed gardens, like raised beds within this garden space. Kind of solarized a lot of um, the pathways and the grasses that had encroached, and it's thriving now. Abby and a few others have really made that just a wonderful garden to step into. We've got the trellises, we've got the beanstalks, the sunflowers,
Mm.
all sorts of different plants and produce. Abby's really into flowers, and so at different times of the year, we've got lilies or dahlias or poppies, or so the pollinators are happy, and it's become a really idyllic little garden. And well, it's a I'd say medium-sized garden, and we're looking to expand it over the next year or so.
Awesome. Um, and do you, so is there electrical hookup, or are you working with off-grid only?
But we have like our tiny house pads are all full service.
Service.
Yeah, full 50 amp service. We have provisioned within the groundwork. So we have that was part of the early stage of the project, was we trenched out the services to the Shangri Loft for power and data and water. And so we've provisioned electrical lines for future solar installations, like a carport that would have solar panels. Um, and the goal long term is for us to gradually move off grid, or have the capability at least to be more or less fully functional off grid. Um, Still grid tied, and still have that there, and in the years ahead to still be on the grid. But the aspiration there is for us to both the property generally, but also with the different tiny house pads, that those would all be become basically a microgrid.
Okay, awesome. And how many, so you have 8 tiny house pads in total, or sorry, can you remind me of how many you have, and then the upcoming ones?
Yeah, so we have the Shangri Loft. So this is where Abby and I live at the moment. It'll eventually become the common space.
Okay.
So it has kind of a kitchen or games area, or workspace on the side. It's got a nice, we call it the catio. It's all screened in, but we've got the nice porch. Um, and inside here, we've got this work studio that also has some fitness equipment. We've got a laundry room that's shared. We could put in some chicken coops one day. So we've got that kind of as the centerpiece here in the middle of the property. And then we've got at the moment we've got a we've got 4 pads One of them is occupied by the Pocket Getaway, so that's our short-term rental. Um, it's a very we have very low vacancy in that. Considering, we're off the beaten path, and in the less traveled valley, we actually do get a lot of guests that come through there. We're now seeing a lot of repeat guests, or guests that old friends, maybe one from Vancouver, one from Calgary, that meet in the middle here and have a nice relaxing week or weekend together. So that's one of the pads. We've got three other pads for renters. And then the eight that you mentioned, those ones don't yet exist. Those are in the meadow
Right.
as the next phase of the project. So we've got the services um, kind of pulled out to the next stage would be to extend the services out to the actual pads there. But we've got a lot of the like I said, the septic system and the water components and the electrical um, conduits and everything, those are kind of ready to grow out from there. But those extra eight pads, that's the next phase. And hopefully in the next year or two, we'll get those up and filled.
Okay, so you have 3 pads available right now for rent?
Two for rent right now.
Two for rent, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna put links to those in the description of this video. And of course, you can always check out our website to see the Big Calm showcase or visit the Big Calm website. And just a question about this. You only have the capacity for 8 tiny homes, and you won't be adding, like you had spoken before about earth ships, and we talked about A-frames and stuff. You're not doing any of that. You're just sticking to tiny homes. Is that true?
Yeah, we've explored other prefab houses. So that I, like I said earlier, I work in grant writing, and some of those grants are for projects that include factory built and prefab houses.
Mhm.
And there is a lot of innovation. There's a huge wave coming in terms
Yeah,
of factory built housing that's pretty innovative. Uh, you've got trailers, yes, but also containers and foldables and domes and A-frames and all sorts of different kits and um, yeah, every type of shape and form, and a lot of attention to not just to the details of the interior finishings, but also the systems there, that they're very efficient and really good four-season houses. So you can see this wave of factory built housing coming. And I think, having gone through kind of the ordeals of renovating, an existing barn loft kind of through the existing contracting channels, this, factory built is really the way to go. It's the best way to do housing. Um, and the next challenge, I think, will be how to place them. So there's of course still the foundations that have to go into it, and also the regulations around permitting to place foundational houses. So that's a step beyond what we're currently looking at with Big Calm. Uh, there's such a big need, I think, for nicely spaced, fully serviced pads for tiny houses on wheels. And we're consistently impressed with the quality of the pro builds that are in the tiny house on wheels space. And we don't have to deal with the permitting of a foundational house because they
Mhm.
are on wheels. And so for now, we're focused just on tiny houses on wheels. I think it's a good niche for us to stay focused on. We have looked at other um, we've been tempted by some of these other interesting builds to potentially do something where that's more fixed, but um, at the moment we're still very much committed, I think, to the tiny houses on wheels
Mhm.
niche.
And I think it's great personally that you're sticking to, you don't want to do the high density kind of model. I think it makes for a more potent community experience. What was the model of your neighbors? You said it was first 10 and then 50. What's that word you used?
Yeah, Dunbar's numbers.
Yeah,
So yeah, forget his first name, but Dunbar, it's often cited as the Dunbar number, 150. That's the most famous one, which is that organizations kind of become bureaucracies after
right.
150, that people can't remember, casually they can't remember people's names beyond 150.
Okay.
And this was kind of made famous with a Brazilian, I think it was Salmar Resources or something in Brazil, that was every time the company grew to 150 people, it spawned a new factory, and then that grew to 150, and that was how it grew. And it kept kind of this loose community within the factory of the workers there without getting too big and too bureaucratic and having layers of management. So 150 is the most famous, but he has all of these concentric circles, that both bigger but smaller. And so on the small side, you've got most people have an inner circle of close friends of about five. And then friends, you've got maybe about 15. And then I think the next one from there is 50, and then up to 150. And so at each of those stages, Dunbar noticed that there was a change in how the organization
Hmm.
needed to be managed and how it was able to function
Mhm.
within itself. Obviously, a group of close friends is much different than a neighborhood of 50 people. And the types of gatherings and dinner tables and um, conflict management structure within those types of
Mhm.
groups are fairly different. So um, I don't think that's even a factor at all in most real estate developments or even some of the resort and campground developments. It's really just a, a strict focus on perhaps a certain type of housing class, but then also a density of those in that area just to optimize the investment. Um, that's important, obviously, is to optimize the investment in some ways, but also part of what you're investing in is the community infrastructure, is the
Mhm.
dynamic between people, and you want the longevity and the continuity of the community,
Sure.
because it can manage itself properly and because it's got enough to serve the different folks within it, and including the conflict management that might arise.
Mhm.
And so for us, kind of the intersection between Ross Chapin's pocket neighborhoods concept, which works both in urban and rural settings, but it's kind of a set of principles around the way houses are situated, um, vis-a-vis around each other, and then Dunbar's number, around say 15 in our case. Those are, which also happens to overlap with the pocket neighborhood sort of ideal size of a pocket neighborhood. Um, it just feels like that's a good, comfortable, manageable, nice community sized number, and it also happens to fit with this landscape and the resources available to it. So
Mhm. Great. Thank you for explaining that. I think I've even heard that systems or villages, something like systems can kind of break down or communities can kind of break down after about 100 people or that sort of, is that kind of, have you heard that?
yeah, I think it has to do with just too many people or not the right management system for the amount of people that it has. I
Yeah.
can, yeah.
So, and I won't get too much into this. Maybe we can talk about it another time, but just so everybody out there knows one thing, there are a couple of things that I'm really interested in. One is the microeconomy aspect of hybrid living and living in pocket communities or away from cities, which some pocket communities are in cities. Um, the other one is conflict management. In my time, so I've been sort of studying communities and witnessing communities and even participated in some of them myself and have noticed that that is an area that really is such an important piece of how this all works because everything that Steve is talking about is really obviously really beautiful and idealistic. And Steve and I have talked about this privately too, that there does come a point in a community, even if it's friends, this happens with me and my own friends and my own relationship, where you're going to bump up against, different values or different ways of experiencing things and seeing things or each other's wounds, even your own personal wounds. And I have seen again and again in my time of witnessing and being in communities that there can be a breakdown, which is really a bummer because you in the times that we're in, it's really such a valuable skill to be able to navigate conflict as community. So I am going to be sharing more in the blog and through my research and on the website and in the academy that we built out about conflict resolution. But yeah, just so everybody remembers, it's a really big piece of it. So I just wanted to, you have anything to say to add to that, Steve?
No, it is a really big piece. It's maybe an uncomfortable topic for
Yeah.
people. You don't come into a community thinking that you're going to be arguing with somebody else in the community, um, but to kind of provision for it, and also to come to it with the maturity as well that um, the community is worth it, and these other folks I may disagree. I don't need to agree with everything. Uh, uh, but that we're going to work it out together, and that we've got other people around us that will help us to figure those things out. Humans are funny creatures that way, but it's kind of inevitable even amongst friends. And to have those kind of systems and support to navigate those issues when they arise is really important to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of the models that I've come across that really work well are like Marshall Rosenberg's work, or active listening, just for people who don't really know, have it the first time hearing about this, active listening, or it's also called like win-win conversations. Rosenberg's NVC, which I studied for a while. So I'm gonna help people in my work in hybrid living across Canada understand that piece of it because I'm really super passionate about it. I also really believe in I was thinking about this yesterday. Hang on, I'm gonna let the dog in again. Sorry. You're gonna stop. I'm gonna introduce you to the people of these days. There she is.
Uh,
There's the rascal who keeps,
Beauty.
hey, pretty girl. I'll keep her right there. Tell me about what are the best parts about being at Big Calm? If you could say to people, hey, look, we have these units available. Obviously, you want to fill them, but what do you think what is going to change about people's lives by coming and living or even coming to visit Big Calm?
Yeah, so with the visits, we've had a few hundred people now go through the Pocket Getaway for stays. A lot of them come for relaxation or a break, uh, or to meet up with friends, or perhaps do some remote work. The guest book is filled with writings about how they were looking for peace and quiet and just some time to think, or reconnection with nature or with their friends or with their family. So um, one of the things that being out in uh, saying being out in wilderness isn't quite right, because we're not camping or anything, but it's being out in nature is very thought-provoking for introspection, and you get to start to see, you hear the birds sing, and you see the clouds move, and you notice things that are you know bigger than you and bigger than your work and your issues and so on. And that can be very therapeutic and very helpful. And so that would be one of the kind of the main things. Like for myself, I wasn't a birder before, but being out here, we're kind of in a bird sanctuary, and I've become obsessed with tracking these different bird songs that come through, or these different, colored creatures that come through, because they're all remarkable, and you get to sort of, at least for me, you observe the different insects and the creatures, you see everything in its time. When um, the hummingbird will show up and leave, and when the bees are active and the mosquitoes come and go, and same with the plants. And um that was probably the most profound thing for me being out here, is just the patterns of nature, and going through those cycles a little bit more, to be more in touch with those, reconnects you, it grounds you to what's important. I think in a more sort of practical sense, you there's a lot of open space here to be able to do uh, hobbies or side hustles, or if you're into reading, you could read lots of books, or if you're into trail running, there's trails. If you're into gardening, there's a lot to do in the garden. And so there's a lot of sort of personal interest projects that you can undertake here. Another thing I did this spring was build bird houses for those birds. And we
Mhm.
have a lot of scrap wood here that we put together and made houses, like super tiny houses for those who come through. And uh, yeah, and maybe the other thing, and probably related to the nature piece, is that out here you see every star in the sky, and when it snows, you've got this blanket of quiet where I describe it as you can hear yourself hearing. And these are things you don't get in the city. It can be just a very sort of, not to be cliche, but kind of calming um, aspect of being here, that you can feel the calm.
Amazing. Thank you. So the connection that you feel. So yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for creating that space and just holding the energy for this to even happen. We are gonna have to wrap up our time here because we both have things we have to do, but we'll keep talking, Steve. And for people wondering how do you live in a place like this and still work and earn an income, I am going to share more about that in the academy. And Steve and I have talked about sort of the challenge of the microeconomy and how do you turn your hobbies and your skills into how do you pay your bills and that whole piece of it. So I'm going to include links in the description and you can follow up on the website with more information from me about that. Steve, I will let you go and thank you so much for your time. This is amazing. I'm super duper inspired. At one point, I want to come visit you at Big Calm.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, and anybody who's interested, I'm going to put all the links here. I mentioned all the different ways you can connect with Steve and Abby at Big Calm. Take a look at their website and the listings that we have on the website for their pads that are available. And Steve, thank you again, and I will chat with you again soon. And anything else you want to say to everybody?
Thank you so much, Natalie. Really nice to chat with you. And
You too.
yeah, thanks everyone.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna turn this off.